Welcome to BestGuessistan, the place we go where life refuses to match the instructions we've been given. On this series, we're going to be exploring the idea of rupture, that thing, that moment, that event, that series of things that splits a life into before and after, and how the systems that surround us struggle to reckon with the versions of ourselves that emerge. I'm Wendy Lurrie. I was a marketer and an agency head and a chief marketing officer, or I was at least until the rupture happened. Now, I'm acting head of communications for BestGuessistan, a country I never knew I needed until it existed. BestGuessistan is the largest island in the archipelago of uncertainty. You won't find it on most maps, not yet anyway. Across the episodes, I'll be speaking with people who've experienced rupture in so many forms. And I'll be speaking with experts who understand what rupture demands from our minds and our bodies, from our workplaces and our relationships and our identities. But today is different. This is the premiere episode, and for this one, I'm not the interviewer. I'm the subject. BestGuessistan didn't arrive as a fully built-out ecosystem or a complex, sprawling project. It arrived in the wake of a traumatic brain injury and the long, alienating aftermath in which I was forced to relearn and rethink everything I did, how I work, how I think, who I am. And before we get into anybody else's rupture, we're going to start with mine. Not because it's the worst kind of rupture and it's never a competition, but because it's the origin story of BestGuessistan. It's where the seeds were planted and where they took root. And to guide our conversation today, I've invited someone very special to join me. Someone who knows me very well from the world I came from, but also from the world I now inhabit. So let's get started. Kim Lauersdorf came up in the trenches of advertising, making sure that her clients succeeded and that their brands truly resonated. After that, she helped co-found, with me, Gyro Human, a healthcare agency that not only challenged the status quo and bucked the industry, but succeeded. And she took that spirit with her when she moved to the client side, first as VP Marketing at Emblem Health, and then as Chief Marketing Officer of Health Benefits at Elevance Health. After 20 years of building teams, brands, and companies, Kim realized her favorite part of the work wasn't actually the marketing. It was helping people unlock their potential. So she formed Cosmic Shift, which combines her expertise in brand building, leadership, and her deep understanding of energy and astrology to help organizations and individuals not only locate their gifts, but actually use them. Welcome, Kim.
Well, thanks, Wendy. I'm excited to be here today and have this conversation.
Me too.
Well, I've reflected a lot on one, just the privilege to have this interview with you because this is your show, but this is really going to be the story about you. And I feel that we have spent, over a decade and a lot of time together and probably know each other some of the best on the planet. So I'm really excited that I got the privilege to have this conversation. And today we're going to talk about the actual accidents, the TBI and how that came in. We're going to spend some time talking about how different systems approached your injury and still approach it. We're going to talk about how you started to process that and where that's gone and the world you've created. So I'm super excited. So let's start with the drama. Let's start with the injury, the accident,
Okay.
the rupture. So take us through this moment.
Okay. It was a little over 3 years ago, almost 3.5 years ago around now. And it was a normal Sunday. I had started a great new job. I was super excited about it. My daughter had just gotten married. I was flying to Paris. Everything was great. And I came back and I did what I often did on a Sunday, which was go to my guitar lesson. I am a student of classical guitar, which keeps me very humble because few things in the world are as difficult as classical guitar. And I had an Uber. And when we got to the location, he let me out. I reached into the back to get my guitar out, but he didn't check to see if I was gone before he hit the button for the hatch to come back down. And it landed on me like skipping stones, but with 1,000,000 pounds more weight, like boom, boom. And honestly, my first reaction was, I'm fine, because my first reaction to every situation is always, I'm fine. Um, I think he looked at me to see if I was okay. I think I might have given him a thumbs up. I definitely gave him a 5-star review and a $1 tip. And then I went upstairs and had a guitar lesson while my head was bleeding. And I have no memory of that lesson. I don't remember a thing about it. And I came home and I said to my husband, Nick, I think I need some first aid. And he cleaned me up and I just figured everything was going to be fine until the next day when I went back to work and everything wasn't fine. And it was interesting because I was working in a tech company and it was mostly men. And so they were guys on call. It was still during COVID lockdown. And they asked what happened. And I told them, and they were like, oh, no, you have to take this really seriously. We play sports. We understand concussions. I'm like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I mean, I was wearing dark glasses too, but I'm like, I'm totally fine. Later that day, the headache started. And that's the headache I've had for 3.5 years, plus other symptoms. So that was the drama
It's the
of the
drama.
moment.
I will tell you, there's not a trunk latch that I do not look at and think of you and how just in a minute, right, is something a innocuous object,
Yes.
right, can change everything. When did you start to understand that this was not an acute injury? This was not something that was going to be stitches and healed, that it was going to be a more chronic situation for you.
It took a while because one of the first things I learned, because, I did my research like we all do. And it turns out that between 70 to 90% of people who have a concussion recover within 10 to 14 days. So for most people, the concussion is done and they just move on. So I didn't realize anything right away. A neurologist I had been working with insisted that I go get a CT scan because they're always looking for a bleed, which fortunately I didn't have. But these things are very hard to pick up on imaging. And it really wasn't until the days dragged on into weeks that I started to see that I was likely going to be in that percentage of people who didn't heal right away. And then every day was a little bit more reckoning, a lot more denial. Little reckoning, even more denial. And just push, 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 just keep going. Just keep going. I didn't want to deal with the idea of having something chronic or something in any way disabling. It's just not who I am. So it was just, let's just keep going. And honestly, denial was my first rep.
It gets us to a lot of wonderful places sometimes.
It does. It also stops us from getting to a lot of wonderful places sometimes.
It does, for sure. When you I'm putting myself in the ER. I'm putting myself in these doctors' offices and trying to language, what I'm feeling, what you're feeling in your head, right? I think we say headache, right? It hurts. We do a pain scale. Um, what was it really like in your body, in your mind? What could you feel? How can you articulate it now, maybe that you even couldn't then?
Great question. I felt a lot of things in my body that I had never felt before. I felt all kinds of shocking sensory sensations. I could suddenly note I couldn't tolerate sound. I couldn't tolerate light. And everything made me feel like my skin was detaching from my body. Parts of my brain felt locked and sluggish. And I did call it a headache in the beginning, but my mother actually helped me coin a better word because it isn't a headache. Headache means something to everybody, right? Everybody pretty much knows what a headache is. Tension, migraine, whatever kind of headache. This wasn't that. This is what she and I ended up coining head pain, because it really was a different kind of pain than anything I had ever experienced. And one of the very odd things about concussion pain is that the pain you experience has no relationship to where in your head you were hurt. So I was hurt here, but the pain was here. It still is. And back here. And in all of these unrelated places, because basically when you have a concussion, your brain gets shoved inside the skull and kind of everything feels like it dislodges. But the language piece is really, really important, because it is so hard to describe these symptoms. If you want to just talk about that a little bit right now.
Yeah.
Um, one of the places I went was Reddit, because where do you go when you can't get answers to anything? You go to Reddit. And one of the saddest places on the internet is the TBI subreddit. And I looked at the way people were describing their symptoms and they were generic. They said things like, I have brain fog. They said, "I feel like I'm a battery with only 20% power." They're grasping for ways of describing things that didn't actually have any language, and that becomes part of the challenge, especially when you're dealing with something that's actually an invisible injury so that no one knows you have unless either something shows in how you engage, or you tell them. So I think language became a giant barrier. I think it is a giant barrier for a lot of people in describing what they're going through.
Well, I mean, I think simplistically in the form of, healthcare, everything's a code,
Mhm,
right? The language
mhm,
is minimized
mhm.
to a code that you can put in, and can you say it right to your clinician to get coded right for what you need? And so I think we have a wildly narrow, definition, and many of us are not as gifted in language, and it can be hard to describe what we think and what we feel. And so how how did people around you understand this change? Because yes, you could probably language it better than most, but still you're the patient, you're the injured, right? And you're going through it, not just experiencing it from the outside. You're not observing this, right? You're experiencing this. How did the world around you handle it?
They didn't. They didn't know what to do with it. Um, Partly because I was relatively inarticulate about what I was feeling, but also because, unlike a lot of other conditions, this is kind of uniquely unrelatable. If you haven't had a TBI, and I wish that no one ever got another TBI and there were concussion protocols everywhere, it isn't something that most of the population experiences. Most clinicians have never experienced it. So I looked fine. I kind of sounded fine because the parts of my brain that were still working well, which were some, others, like I said, slowed down, they compensated. So I developed these sort of compensatory mechanisms that would allow me to sound pretty much fine. It's what I did at work. But I could feel distance growing between me and everyone else in my life. I think they started to feel it to different degrees, but I definitely felt this sense of the place where I am, where I'm standing, is unstable. And all of the people who usually occupy this world with me and help make it stable, it's like pieces of this island or this ice floe are just breaking off and floating away.
It's one thing to have an injury that people don't understand, to be experiencing it, but we've talked about one of the greatest losses in this was identity. And you are a brilliant mind. You come from brilliant minds in your parents. And that has always been probably our first love language with each other was our minds. Our intellect, the what we could think about and idealize and create. And so you're not only injured, but you're injured in the place that has defined you.
Yes.
So what has that journey been like? Because identity loss is isolating in and of itself. Injury is isolating in and of itself. And you went and did both. You injured your identity.
That was the first system that failed me, actually, was my identity. Look, I've been through a lot of things. Everybody's been through a lot of things, but not everything that's happened to me has affected my identity the way this one has because I identify my intellect so tightly with my identity, right? I mean, that is who I am. And when I was suddenly faced with a situation where my brain couldn't figure out how to figure this out, I was gobsmacked. I was sad. I was twitchy. I was anxious. The only tool I had to fix things was my brain, and my brain was now the thing that needed fixing. And it would take quite a while until I figured out how to fix it. I mean, I went through I would say 2 years of sadness and difficulty and denial and isolating myself from people and withdrawing because I couldn't reckon with this identity shift. Who was I without my brain? So it was brutal, absolutely brutal. Long 2 years.
Yeah, and we live across the country from each other. So we're not the neighborhood. Can't bring you chicken soup. Could order it for you, but can bring it to you. And it was a couple years before we saw each other in person. And I didn't know what to expect. We hadn't really engaged in a physical state You had talked about, you'd written about being tired. You wrote about, these things that you struggled with. And and I will tell you from the outside, our first time together, it didn't feel like much had changed, right? It didn't feel like you were different and you were injured, and it still doesn't often. And and I put that in a little bit of two buckets of one, yes, you've done miraculous work to make this system, new operating system for you work. I also put it in, that's probably lonely in and of itself, because now you're trying to look at a world and say this world is not the same. I am not the same. And then a good friend is sitting there going, "But you look the same and it feels the same."
Yes.
And there's probably a tiny part that says, "Congratulations, Wendy, you did this well." And there's probably a much bigger part that says, "Crap, like, what does it take for people to get this if my best people can't get this?" Is is there truth in that?
There is truth to that. I might even assign some percentages. You and I like data. I would say it was probably 15 to 20%. Look at me, right? I can still read as the person I was, and the rest of it was just, oh my God, nobody gets what I'm going through, and I don't know how to help people understand. And I don't want pity. I don't want overemphasizing, what this is. I didn't want this to become the subject of every single conversation, which is exactly what it was becoming for a really long time. So it was a mix of both, but mostly it was just, how do I expect anyone to understand what's going on if I don't understand what's going on?
Of course. And I mean, I know we there's the advice piece of this to people, right? Right now we're talking about the story and what did you experience? But I just think this point is really important, and I want to draw out your kind of advice in this space of how would you help people navigate that? And so, from the outside, as someone helping a friend navigate it, I would say you've got to make room for all of it. Right. And I think it's very important. I think it's very easy. We want our friends to be okay. We want our loved ones to be okay. We're okay if they're okay.
Right. Yes.
Oftentimes. And so I think we have this knee jerk that we want you to be okay so we can be okay. And I think it's okay for you to not be okay. And that's, I think, really important for the caregiving side on the outside of this. But what would you from the inside of it say to us?
Well, I think a big part of the work I've done and the whole sort of ethos of this project is the idea that it is okay not to be okay. That we live in a world of advice overload and toxic positivity, which may work for some people, doesn't work for everybody. And it becomes a burden and it takes a ton of energy to deal with all of that. It takes a ton of energy to deal with every friend who read something about turmeric or or this supplement or the endless, Reddit opinions on all kinds of things. And what I encourage people to do in the beginning was just read about it a little bit. Because, like I said, because this is so difficult, because it's so unrelatable, a little knowledge is useful, but the advice becomes overwhelming and confusing and just adds to this sense of fog and blur that you live in. It really, really, really does. And also, I think this is true with caregiving, with people who are going through caregiving too. Having to do a lot of phone calls were almost impossible for me. This was the other sort of social problem. I couldn't really do phone calls because I had a very hard time focusing. Doing things on a screen was difficult because I had visual disturbances. Being in person was difficult because people were expecting me to behave a certain way. So I had to create this moat. And and yet I still owed people updates, and they were status updates. And for a while I had status. I mean, I don't have status updates anymore because nothing's changed. But for a while I tried every treatment that was available. I mean, pretty much every legit treatment and a few that were kind of on the bubble. And so we could talk about those. But once that stopped and there really wasn't anything new to try, talking about it, even now when people are like, "How's your head?" I'm like, "Nothing to talk about, nothing changes." It's not a good use of my energy or their time. And I'm done with the advice. Like I said, I have tried everything.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's part of, so we definitely walked ourselves right in the system failure part of this conversation. Right. How could we not? Right. One of the probably essential systems in our lives is the community we build around us, right? The families we were born into, the families we build, the friends we build. It's a system around us. And what fascinates me about this system is it's governed by two different rules, right? It's governed by the norms and values that you have created, right? And your family and your friends and what you expect. And it's governed by cultural norms. We expect people to behave this way with people that they are friends and family with,
Yes.
right? And these can be two different sets of norms. There can be overlap for sure. And so I think when I think about you've done both, right? And when you stripped away and you talked about like it was really challenging for me as not being a physical proximity friend to you. You, as you just said, you took away email, took away phone calls, right? You took away text, right? Text was harder than email,
Took away
and
Zoom.
right, and it was like, well, where do I meet her? Right? How do I get across this moat? And what does it look like? Right? Because now there's not a book here. So how do you think about this family and system structure? Where did it hold for you, and where were the failures? And it's not failures in our structures, right? These are cultural norm structures, right? If you just send the flowers, it's fine, right? You did it. Where did it hold, and where did it fall apart for you?
I don't think the family and friend systems failed me. I think I failed them. Which is interesting because it's also the language they use in medicine. When something doesn't work, it didn't fail you, you fail it. I was not fit to be the person I was anymore. I couldn't command a room or laugh easily or focus on it. I was so wrapped up in these symptoms, which again, like now I'm used to them. You live with something for 3.5 years, right? The human ability to become inured to anything is almost infinite. But at the time, it was all new. And I was so caught up with what was going on and the fact that because it's your brain, it affects everything. I couldn't hold up my part, and I felt like I still needed to. And I think that was where the challenge was not giving myself the grace or the permission to say, you know what? I'm not okay. And this is what not okay looks like. That was completely out of character. And you know that. I mean, you and I have muscled through everything.
I mean, I laugh because, we had clients tell us, and you started this with like your injury. And so I was so glad that these men came to your rescue because we've had so many men tell us that unless it's bleeding or falling off, I'm not going to healthcare. Right. And I've had this conversation, recently about in order for me to say I'm not okay, I'd have to be dying.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that is insane. That is insane.
Totally. But
But
it's
so
true.
yeah, right?
But
And
it's
that is
true.
we understand, right? We understand the go, 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 and our systems are built to go, go, go. And me to not say okay would mean I'd have to be quitting, right? It's a
Right.
loss. It's done. We're done.
I'm weak. I'm we I'm no longer strong. I can't muscle through this. I all of that what that does is it in addition to everything else you're going through and all the systems that are failing and all the ways you're failing, it adds this heavy, heavy blanket of guilt and shame because I could not fix this. I couldn't push through the way I pushed through everything else. And I'd had health challenges before. None of them felt like this. This was so unique, so different. But it came with all of these other really, really unwelcome emotions that also created a greater distance between me and everybody around me. I mean, the safest place for me was at rehab because there everybody was in a sort of similar boat. Everybody had a brain injury.
Yeah.
These were my
And I
people now.
and I think it's both things are true here of you did need space, right? You did need time. And that space and time, back to the cultural norm of it, we're conditioned that that is bad,
Yes. Yes.
right? We are conditioned that if I give you space, you're leaving, not that I'm just creating more room for you, right? Space is creating more room. And so I think, when to the outside of it of having to be there for you is we needed to be better at creating space, not leaving. And you probably experienced both of that. And I hope people can understand space doesn't mean leaving.
Right. Well, and what's ironic and unfortunate about it is that I needed the space. The space existed. It was already, I mean, all of a sudden I felt like I was looking at the world through thick plexiglass. There was a barrier between me and everyone else and everything that was going on. And even though it was space I needed and space I created, it didn't make me feel any less abandoned for it.
Of course not.
I felt abandoned, even though nobody abandoned me. But, you add the abandonment to the shame and the guilt, and you just get this toxic brew of feelings. Oh, and that's the other thing that happens with a head injury often, and it happened with mine, is that things you could always manage suddenly become ungovernable. My moods, my anxiety, my emotions, things that I had always been able to just keep under wraps. You know, right? Don't show it, right? Never. I couldn't manage it. Everything was at the surface. I cried at everything. I was having anxiety attacks all the time. Um, and that also made me want to create more space, right? And like keep people further away, which adds to the abandonment and this whole vicious cycle that I was caught in for several years.
So, because we're just too good at taking the blame for ourselves, let's move on to different
Okay,
systems.
okay.
Let's talk about the healthcare system. You started the introduction that we worked on building a healthcare agency together. It will go down as probably my favorite thing I ever did in my career. And we used to say, right, we had a very broad view of the industry. We didn't just look at pharma like most of the marketing agencies did. And we used to say when one part of the system sneezes, another part catches a cold. And that was really our way of articulating that it's so interconnected and that it is so reliant on each other's pieces that you could not, sneeze in a subway car, you're going to get everybody. It's kind of how that system is. Were we right? How true was what we were thinking when you had to experience the system in a whole new way?
We were right. But one other thing that turned out to be true and interesting and surprisingly challenging was access, right? So I'm in New York City. I had really good insurance coverage, right? I know a million people, big orbit of healthcare providers and all kinds of professionals. I needed to get to a concussion center. Large systems have concussion centers. NYU has one of the best in the world. I couldn't get there. Even with all my access, even with all my information, I needed a favor. My brother, who has a very, very good friend who's a neurologist, got involved and made a plea to the concussion center to please take me on as a patient. Because I did have a neurologist, but that was a neurologist I had for headaches because I've had a long history of migraine. And he was great, but concussion is different than headache. And I needed someone to specialize.
Was the
Yes, I had a
access
wardrobe of neurologists.
was the access just finite resources or just only so
It
many,
was
or
no
was it
appointments. No appointments. Sorry, no appointments. And then my brother's friend Howie intervened and I got seen. And once I was inside the system, then I had access to rehab. Then I had access to Rusk, and they could start to work on the deficits because parts of what go wrong in a brain injury, it affects different people in different ways, right? You can have speech and language issues, vestibular, which is the fancy word for balance, vision, sensory, a whole bunch of other issues. And there are lots of therapies that actually really do help with that. Nothing helps with the pain ever. But because I had access to the concussion center, they were able to refer me to Rusk. And I was able to start balance therapy and the first of what would become 2 rounds of vision therapy, which really, really helped. I would not be able to do this right now had it not been for that. So it was all interconnected. The shock for me was the front door was closed.
it's
And it also made me wonder about there are something like, I think there are about 3 million new concussions in the US every year, right? Then take the 10 to 20% who don't get better in 10 to 14 days and start to add it up. There are a lot of people suffering with this out there. And most people don't even live near a major hospital that has a concussion center. So if I'm struggling with this, what is everyone else doing?
well, and that's where my brain was starting to, think through of, first of all, it's not an elite club that anybody wants to be in, right? So
Hardly.
you make it sound elite, but it's normal, right? It's so prevalent. And in order to get through the layers of diagnostic understanding, right? Well, first we had to, I guess, get in the door. Let's get in the door. Then let's get to the level of can I articulate and people really understand what I'm saying and really take these symptoms seriously? Uh, then can I get access to the therapies, to the treatment, to all of that? Then, of course, we're going to get, into the payment side of things and what are insurers going to enable in that. I'm very curious when you got into like the diagnostic symptom part of it, were the clinicians, did they easily grab on to what you were saying and they knew like this is what was going on with you? Or was it kind of nebulous and you had to keep driving at what you were experiencing? What was that once you were in the door? How were you welcomed?
I would actually say I was very welcomed, and I was also it was the first place I felt kind of understood. I mean, when I said to the neurologist when I went in for the first exam, "Can we turn the lights off in the exam room?" And she said, "Of course." I said, "Okay, someone gets it." I mean, my one of my greatest wishes, and I built a ministry of accommodation that does this, is that every light switch everywhere in the world is on a dimmer,
I
so that
agree.
anyone who has sensory issues with light can turn it down. Um, it was interesting. Like she made me feel welcome and understood. I was incredibly fortunate to meet her when I did, and I still see her to this day. Um, Rusk was great. And Rusk also showed me people who were in much worse shape than me, which is kind of a mixed blessing because it's like, okay, it could be worse, which is one of the things people tell you could be worse, but it would also still really, really sucked. Doing things like walking down hallways. This is part of like the vestibular thing. They make you walk down these long, wide hallways and look up, look down, and you get dizzy very, very quickly. And look right, look left. And there are other people doing it in this. It's an out of body experience to watch everyone stumbling down this hallway, just trying to stay upright. It was bizarre. And
It's the
part of me
wrong
felt
kind of
like,
drunk tank. It's not the
sorry?
drunk tank. It's not a drunk tank.
Right, exactly. I mean, part of me was like, I found my tribe, but the other part of me was, I don't really want to be part of this tribe. So it was, yes, I felt like I was in the right place, but also it was like, this is not a place I really want to be in.
Yeah. So speaking of our accommodations, I hate light as well, but let
Okay.
me try to open the blinds a little bit here.
But
Um,
I did check out one thing, and you'll appreciate this. I did check out all the pharma pipelines to see what drugs for this were in the works. And the thing that shocked me, and I've looked at it since, there wasn't a ton, which really surprised me because this happens to people we consider among the most elite of our society, right? Um, Athletes, people in the military, people in dangerous situations. And you would think that with all that interest, there would be so much more research going on. And what I found was pretty much all of the treatments are repurposed migraine meds.
which I mean, when you told me that, like it still spins me a little bit because it is fascinating, right? It is we know, right? That culturally, you know about CTE and you know about the concussion risks in major sports. Of course, we know football, but it's actually even more common in soccer.
Hockey, soccer, yep.
Like it is so prevalent, and these are, big money making engines in our society, right? So it is shocking to me. And we know that, drugs are designed for men more than they are for women. So again, being so prevalently male often the injury, like it from a sports side of things, it just shocks me that this isn't a problem that is looking to be solved.
I think it's a little bit better now because I looked recently, and there's more work going on this. I mean, CNS, as you know, is like a huge area of pharma research, mostly because of like Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Um, but I think this is a uniquely hard thing because so little of how the brain works is deeply, deeply understood. And I recently started writing a series of posts called "The Physics of After," which are really just ways to document how my brain worked before on a specific sort of vector and how it works now. Not that I think I'm going to shape the future of clinical research for traumatic brain injury. I don't. But maybe because I do have access to language and a pretty good understanding of the before after of how the brain is working, maybe that could actually help send researchers in a slightly different direction. But I think it's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. And they're trying to solve it with things like better protection for kids who are playing sports, better helmets, even though the NFL players don't seem to want to wear them, all of that stuff. But they're trying to get better at the sideline testing, make it a little less, gross and more fine. and try to prevent as many of these as they can. And pharma's really got to pick it up in terms of research, but I do think it's a very, very difficult area to study.
Yeah, so there's we're gonna get into this language piece very, very soon. But I want to talk about one more system. But before we leave the healthcare, is there anything else, any blind spots in it? We haven't talked, we both have worked very closely in the insurance space, and we know even when you're inside the insurance space, it is a very hard thing to navigate, let alone be outside the insurance space.
This is healthcare adjacent. So I was fortunate, and the insurance company has been consistently good about approving things that have to do with this injury, which I'm appreciative of. The system that failed me in sort of an epic way was the disability system.
Mm.
And about 2.5 years, because I kept trying to work. I mean, I kept just trying to just keep, one foot in front of the other, muscle for just it wasn't really working. It went so far as to have the idea of to start my own business, which was going to be a baking business, which was a horrifically bad idea.
Well, first of all, anyone that has ever eaten your baked goods does not think this is a bad idea, but maybe the
Thank you.
business part of it. Got it. Okay,
Right. The
got it.
business part, it just doesn't scale. But I needed to just, continue being who I was. Wait, sorry, I lost the question. Go back again. That happened with a brain injury
Disability.
too.
We're on
What? Oh,
the
disability. So, after I tried doing this and tried many different ways to work and continue to earn a living and do all that stuff, I realized one day I can't do this. My brain can't handle the stress of the jobs I used to have. I can't handle the screen time. The anxiety is too great. And so I decided to apply for disability, which seems to be the system that is available for people who can no longer work because they are disabled. I mentioned it to my neurologist, and she said, "I've been waiting for you to say that. And I've been wondering what's been taking you so long." And it was because of the denial. Because that said, I'm not the person I am. And so I went into this. It is not a great situation when someone with a brain injury has to navigate a major governmental agency with all of its paperwork and bureaucracy and like Internet 1.0 and all of that kind of stuff. And one day I just sat down with paperwork stacked everywhere, and I'm going to go through it with all the medical records, everything. And I did the entire, I did the entire process. And I made a mistake. It actually asked me if I was applying for Social Security benefits. The answer was no. I said yes. This is why you don't leave people alone with brain injuries to do this, which required like redoing the entire thing and just adding layers of complexity and confusion. There was someone very, very nice who sort of offered to be a little bit of a Sherpa at disability, and she would keep me posted on what was going on. I had to be tested. I had to be evaluated. I had to go to these kind of dreadful places for these independent medical exams and be treated by people who didn't know me and didn't care about me. But I did it because these were steps in the process that I needed to take. And at the end of it, I got a denial. Yeah, denial, which turns out to be the norm. And I know people who said, well, I got approved on the third time, on the eighth time, on the fourth time. And there was absolutely no way that I had the energy to do that. And to ask someone who's going through this to also deal with that kind of bureaucratic horror just seems doubly unfair. So that was a system that failed.
Yeah, it's almost designed to fail if
It
you have
felt
to.
that way. It felt like you were
Sure.
running hurdles, right? And the hurdles kept getting higher, and then they were like flaming hurdles.
Oof. So one more system that I wanted to talk about, and you kind of touched on this and get walking through the disability door is the workplace. And, I think part of our bond was is a strong belief of what leadership looks like, what culture looks like, how people should be treated in an organization, doing right by people, by clients, by each other, I think was part of our connective tissue always. Uh how did you experience this through the workplace lens, and did your definition of right by people change?
It's interesting because I would say where I was working, they were humane and they were concerned, and they offered me accommodations from day one. They were like, "Do you want to cut back your hours? Do you want to take more time off?" I mean, they couldn't have been more accommodating. They weren't the problem. I was, because to accept those accommodations was an admission that I was weak, that I couldn't just muscle through this, that I couldn't fix it myself. So I pushed those accommodations away. it became clear over time that I needed those accommodations, right? And that the person that I was now was just not the person they had hired. I just couldn't do the job at that level. But it wasn't their lack of willingness, it was my lack of willingness to accept.
It's heartbreaking. Right? If I'm just honest, it's heartbreaking. Um, because one, I think you were fortunate that you had accommodations, right? I think there are plenty of places that will, quickly roll up the carpet or, turn their back on that. And so to know that it was there, right? And it was available, and we get in our own ways because of the stories we tell ourselves, or just frankly how we're conditioned. Uh,
It was also a European company, and that actually had a lot to do with their sort of attitude toward illness and recovery and taking care of people. It was not as much an American ethos, which
okay.
where I think I would have had quite a different experience.
Anybody who knows you knows you're the word lady. There are still hundreds of words I do not know. I've looked them up when you've used them in casual conversations. Um, and so again, that's just it's been one of your natural gifts, right? It's been part of this. How has language played a role in all of this for you? How has it supported you? Where has it come up short?
So language definitely comes up short, as we talked about before, with describing symptoms and how you're feeling. I will give you an example of a bit of language I used many, many years ago and something completely unrelated. I was having some kind of abdominal pain, and the doctor asked me if I could describe the pain, and I said, I feel like my internal organs have been turned into guitar strings, and someone is plucking them. And he said, you have a very interesting way of describing. Um, but I found the limitations of language very, very quickly, especially in communicating with everybody I love what was really going on. But then I started to write because writing has always been the way I have made sense of things, especially things that were new and confusing, and nothing fit that definition more than this. It took me about a year before I started writing. I didn't write right away. And I wasn't writing for anyone. I was just writing to try and figure out what the hell was going on with me. Who was I now? And a friend of mine, our former creative director we worked with, helped me name what I was writing concussed CMO, because both of those were true. I was concussed and I was a CMO. But I wasn't writing for anybody else. I wasn't writing to tell the story. I was just writing to try and make sense of things. And that's actually how the project started. And that's really all it was. It was kind of like my blog for me. So I started writing it that way for a while. And that was, like I said, just for me. And then I realized my friends were reading this. People in my family were reading this. And this could actually be a really good vehicle. This was how I solved the problem of, no email, no text, no Zoom. This is how I could let everybody know what was going on without having to talk to every individual person, because that was just a crushing amount of energy that I didn't have. And that worked. And I broadened it, and I made it about Nick, and I made it about Bear and things that were going on in our lives. And it became like a completely different thing. And I was writing that way for a while. And then it was late last year, maybe early this year, I just had an idea, which was, you and I are marketers, you and I are strategists. What if I looked at the problem through marketing lenses? What if I took marketing frameworks like the 4 C's, or building a brief, or briefing creative, or creating a content journey, and looked at this problem through that lens, and how would I solve it sort of as a marketer, which was interesting. And people started to flock to the writing more because I was making it more relatable, because it was something that was relevant and familiar and understandable to them. And that was fun. I didn't know where it was going to go, but it was fun. And then I kept doing that. And then in one of the marketing pieces I wrote, I had a throwaway line, right? I mean, by the way, I don't know about you, all of my best strategies have been ones I backed into, right? I come forward into. I had a line in there about how no one seems to know how to solve this problem with what's going on. Nobody seems to know the answer. Everyone's just taking their best guess. Welcome to Best Guessistan. And that's all it was. That's all it was. It wasn't a world. It wasn't a concept. It was just a throwaway line. But when I went back and looked at what that triggered next was, wait, what if it is a place? Why can't it be a place? Why can't I create a world where the things that people like me need are already there, and they don't have to be negotiated, they're anticipated? and they don't demand that you rise to meet the world rises to meet you. And that sort of gave me the idea of like, let's just build a country. Let's build a nation for people who are going through what I would later recognize and call rupture, right? The thing that breaks your life into before and after. So it started with TBI people, but
Yep.
then as I started broadening my thinking, I was like, wait, rupture comes in all kinds of ways. And this could be a place for everyone.
Well, and my mind goes a couple different places on that. Of one, I think so often when people um, are writers or trying to express, you try to find the lane and you try to stick in that lane. And the world's messy and our minds are messy and our experiences are messy and it's really hard. So for me, it's that evolution feels very natural to what you were experiencing, right? I need to get my hands around what is this thing? How do I even language it to, okay, yeah, now I'm ready to use my framework part of
Hmm.
my brain.
Hmm.
And now I'm ready to get into creativity. And of course, I think about, how many lines have we picked up off of a creative
I know
idea
which one you're
before,
thinking of.
right? Of like, no, but
It's
it's a
the
line,
architecture of hope.
right? A line is an idea. And what I was reflecting on you have always been drawn to world building in what you read,
Yes.
right? Oh,
Yes.
your favorite books as a kid, the ones that I read Brave New World on one of our vacations together so that I would be invited to the dinner table.
Sorry
that,
about
I could,
that.
that I could come back inside the house.
You had to read Brave New World. Sorry.
I am grateful I did. And because there is something different in world building, right? There is something creative, expansive, less limiting in the language. And so talk to me about that part of like why world building, or what has world building given permission to?
Great question. Okay, so why world building? First of all, because one of my favorite things, and you and I have done this together, it's create something out of nothing. I mean, a lot of people can tinker with an existing system or product or process, but to create something out of thin air, that's magic. That's adding something to the world, right? And all those years at agencies, I mean, I did business development for a long time. You're selling a reality that doesn't necessarily exist. You're solving problems in completely new ways, but you're creating things that didn't exist basically with nothing. Dust, glue, a little bit of spit. So I've always felt the most alive creating things that way. And I've said to people, if you just need someone to tinker around the edges, I am not your girl. But if you need something built from the ground up with, frankly, give me nothing, I'm the one.
Give me
So I
the wood, the pile of sand. I'll build you the sandbox. Do not put me in
exactly.
a sandbox and ask me to build a castle.
So it's always been a natural place for me. And you're right, it is reflected in the things I've read. I mean, Lives of the English Majors and all of that stuff. It's like Gulliver's Travels. Those kinds of world building stories have just like always been like really, really magical. But what I found was once I started to do it, I realized how infinitely expandable it became. And the first one I wrote was called 36 Hours in Guessistan. I ripped off the New York Times' 36 Hours in Travel thing, and I just created all these places to put in the different time slots, and then started to think, wait a minute, maybe we do need something like this. Maybe we do need a ministry of accommodation that's for people like this. Maybe there should be a ministry of updated expectations. And the more I thought about it, and the more I started thinking about this larger idea of rupture, which is grief and loss and betrayal and diagnosis and caregiving and menopause and anything else that like fractures your life this way, people need different things. And what the whole project became about, yes, it's the world building, but it's world building in service of something. And it's in service of permission. Giving people permission to not be okay when they're not okay, and not to force them into the toxic positivity that just permeates the culture and makes people feel like failures when they don't recover on a schedule, when the healing takes longer than they're told.
The language opens something up, right? So I was looking through notebooks the other day and I found our one and our agency creating notebook. And I laughed out loud because instead of, barriers or obstacles or threats, In your handwriting in my notebook, it says corridors of panic. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that while you were
That's
typing.
okay. That's okay. I kept it down. I
Right.
forgot about it.
And I was like, in a moment, I knew exactly, right? It was so the right thing to say, right? These were going to be the areas that people were panicking in, and our job was going to be to alleviate this panic. Of course, nobody would write that down on a piece of paper. They would say, barriers, objectors, threats. Um, Best Guessistan uses this very different language. Like, are there things that you have named that you just are like, this is so universal? Are there ministries that you've named? Like, talk to some of the language that you love in this, because I think that is my outside perspective of what makes Best Guessistan so approachable is it's universal, right? You found language that no matter what I'm experiencing, it fits. Like, I understand that. So what has been some of how you've gotten to that unifying language, or that unifying language that has really landed for you?
Let's start with the name, right? The word Best Guessistan does not trip off the tongue. And early on in the world building phase, I was talking to Nick, my husband, about it, and I said, "What do you think of the name?" And he said, "It's hard to say." And I went, "Oh, interesting. It's hard to say." And then I went and wrote a piece called "It's Hard to Say." That's the point, because recovery isn't easy, and it isn't smooth, and it isn't linear, right? And everything about this process is difficult. And it was okay not only okay that the name was difficult to pronounce, it was kind of the point. And I tried to strip out, I don't have a lot of medical language in there. I don't have a lot of therapy language in there. I do borrow the language of corporate America a lot because I find it very, very useful, both as a sword and a shield. Um, but I take language, Nick calls me the word lady. I feel like I'm glad I did all the reading I did when I was younger, because I can't do it now because I've retained all of that. But every play I wrote, every poem I read, every piece of history I knew, it's all in there. And I have just been able to hold on to all of those different types of language, and try to find ways of talking about things that are more approachable. I mean, I read stuff that people wrote who were going through this, and it just didn't speak to me. Even to people with TBIs, talking about other people with TBIs, it didn't speak to me. It didn't relate. So I was looking for language that would break through, because there's a lot of like mushy, squishy language around this, right? And I wanted language that would land. I wanted people to feel something. And by helping people feel something, the distance between me and them shrunk. I mean, that's what this project has really helped do, is reduce the distance between me. I mean, the plexiglass isn't there anymore.
When you think about language, I think, you use this, there's squishy language. And I think oftentimes some language is so big. It's so bigger than me, right? I think about going through healing journeys myself, and I'm like, God, it just doesn't fit. And then, I might wrestle with it for a few months and want to change the language. And then I'm like, okay, maybe I understand how it fits. Uh, so I think the language of Best Guessistan is so critical. And there's three buckets, right? When we talk about our strategy brains, right? We've got the rupture bucket. How do you get into Best Guessistan? We've got the systems, right? Talking about systems, and systems are not widely unique, right? They are systems and intentionally similar. And then there, as you said, the possibilities, right? That's kind of the through lines of Best Guessistan. So let's talk about the rupture, because you came into Best Guessistan through a TBI. But when you reflect, is that the only rupture that brought you to Best Guessistan? Is can any rupture bring you to Best Guessistan? What is a rupture, and why is Best Guessistan your destination after a rupture?
I'll start at the end. So let's start with rupture, right? So it is the thing that happens in your life that forces you to realize at some point that you need to stop comparing yourself to who you were before it happened. That's a trap, right? Um, right. I mean, there are things people go through that are very difficult for some, less difficult for others. Definitely powered through some things that other people would find very difficult. They didn't break me. They didn't change my identity. They didn't alter my understanding of who I was or what value I have on this earth or what I mean to people and what they mean to me. None of that happened until this. A friend of mine had asked me a while back, because I had dealt with a breast cancer scare in 2018. I was treated for it, cancer free, all of that. And I was very fortunate. And she said, "Why is this different?" And I said, "Because honestly, my boobs don't define me. I never broke. That was never a rupture for me. My brain defines me." And it had to be that level break at the identity level for me to recognize the power of the idea of rupture and how many different ways it manifests. And when I started talking to people about it, it was actually interesting. I started bringing up this idea to just some of our best Guessistan officials in the early days, and their first reaction would be like, "Yeah, I haven't been through anything like that." And then I would say, "Well, it's this is the kind of thing I'm talking about." And one of my friends said, "It's interesting." He said, "I would never have thought about it that last year, but my job was eliminated, and I'm having trouble finding a new one. My parents are moving away. I'm having trouble at home." And yeah, it feels like a rupture. And once I started hearing that from people, that really helped me universalize the entire thing. Because honestly, this is a rupture. This isn't even the worst kind of rupture. There's no competition in rupture. All rupture is bad. But there are worse. But this is just my origin story. But for me, what had to break was here. That's what had to break.
Yeah, it's what I love about the language of rupture, and I've had this debate, right? Is there a difference between a breakdown, a breakthrough, and a break apart?
Mm,
Right? We use those as three different things. I had
mm,
a breakdown. Oh, I had a breakthrough. Oh, I broke apart. And to me, I look at those and I go, they're all the same
yeah.
thing. They're
They
just
are.
which lens you picked up to look through. And I think that's what I love about rupture. Right? It brings that unifying piece to these things that we try to delineate. We try to delineate the breaks.
Put them in their lanes, right? We have to put everything in lanes.
And it won't be so bad if I put it in this lane. Right? I'm not that. And rupture just brings this real neutralizing to there's a lot that will break something. Small ways, undeniably irreversible ways. And what we will experience from that rupture is a lot of universal emotion
Mhm.
experience. And so that's where I do think rupture really nullifies that. But you don't stop at the rupture. That's not the point of Best Guessistan, right? The rupture is just the mode of transportation.
Mhm. It's the initiating event.
How did you get here by boat? Did you get here by plane? Right?
You get
How
to
did
best Guessistan by boat.
okay, always a boat.
Always a boat.
Uh,
It's an island in an archipelago.
Kristen, my wife will be thrilled that it's a boat. Uh, she'll be right there.
Tell her it's a ferry.
She's there already. Uh, the the next kind of real existence of Best Guessistan is to challenge the systems and is to look at okay, we have a roadmap in real life of experience this rupture, get put into the system, or put into the system, experience a rupture.
The system can cause the rupture. Goes both ways.
It could go both ways. So talk to me about what does it mean when I say Best Guessistan is about the systems?
Mhm. What that means to me is that you understand that what the ruptures are revealing are the failures of the systems, right? Like all of these systems that we expect to be in place for us and work when we need them, whether it's finding the right treatment for the condition, making sure you have access to the right services, surviving a workplace, managing your relationships, all of those, they fail. They fail, and it's never people who fail, and I'm really careful in the writing to make that point. I'm never talking about individual human failure, it's systems that fail us. We don't fail the systems. And very often you don't know how these systems will perform until you need them. And at the very moment you need them, at your moment of maximum vulnerability, that's when you experience a system that wasn't really designed for what you need. And the idea of best guesses, I mean, best guesses is not a utopia. And anyone who's read it knows that I'm not painting some, happy picture of a perfect land. It's not that at all. But it's a place that lets it be okay for you not to be okay and doesn't force you into a lane. and doesn't put you on a schedule and just gives you the space and time and resources and support in a million different ways to figure it out on your own. So so the rupture reveals the systems. The systems reveal their failures.
And it's so I'm sitting here, just if I've never read Best Guessistan, like how do I get it, right? How do we make people get it? And I and I think, we're still using conceptual language, but we are there, right? You experience a rupture and you come into this world, and to your point, you're not you're not pointing fingers at flaws in the systems. You're exposing them, but you're telling people it's okay to feel exactly what you feel because here's how it wasn't built for you, right? Here's exactly why you feel like that because it wasn't right. And it's not about the failures, it's about the acceptance that it isn't that failure, right?
Exactly.
It's creating this world that when I sit down and I look to the people next to us, I go, "Oh, yeah, you're here too." Right? We're here. And then it doesn't sit. You don't sit on that bench,
Mhm.
right? It then moves into what if? What if? And so this is where you start creating, right? You've helped people see themselves in the rupture. Then you've helped them sit among a group of citizens that say we're all like this. It's not us, it's that system. And then what if? And so a lot of this what if comes in your ministries.
Yeah, it does.
And so let's touch on a couple ministries to help people understand how you're thinking about the what if and what you're hoping people pick up from the what if.
So I mentioned the ministry of accommodation, which I tend to refer to as sort of the or ministry, because kind of everything comes from that. Everything comes from the idea that people going through this need different things than they had before. They need different forms of support. They need to not be questioned. They need to not have to prove their disability. That's a big one. Um, there's also a related one is the ministry of plausible narratives, which are the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of what's going on. I have a house of blues, which has a reckoning room, which is if you really want to face your rupture, go there. I have an island called Perhapsia, where you just go just to see what if, just what if. And the world building keeps continuing. In fact, just over the last few days, there's been the creation of a Ministry of Intelligent Timing. By the way, that's for you.
Yep. Yep.
There's a Ministry of Received Wisdom, which is about a topic you touched on earlier before, which is sort of the advice piece of it. And that one felt like it was a while in the writing because it was really about the idea of how we've weaponized and industrialized advice. What used to be friendly and helpful and, benign mostly is now an industry that kind of commands you 3 steps, 4 phases, do this. I was able to get over it, so you can too. All that self-help stuff is really difficult for people who have gone through this kind of rupture and are not finding solutions in the existing world. I mean, that stuff makes you crazy. Um, so, and the third one, the third one's sort of the most important one, and I think it took me the longest one to write, is actually the Ministry of Rupture. Because the rupture is the defining event, and then the Ministry of Accommodation is what starts to create an infrastructure. And a big part of the whole idea of the ministries is the idea that they are an infrastructure for survival. They're not decorative. They are to provide, to take away the things that stress people who are going through this, right? And I actually, in some of them, I have a gym, I have a hair salon, I have a whole bunch of these different kinds of places, and in each one, I kind of interrogate what is going on in those settings that make people anxious, especially people who are going through these kinds of things, right? Is it the waiting in line? Is it feeling that you're being pushed to do something like there? And and then I just inverted them. It's like, what if we made those go away? What if we solved the problem in a different way? And I actually think that's kind of the heart of Best Guessistan too, is what if we just solve the problem in a different way? So the ministries and the sort of governance system, they're the architecture of, I wouldn't say recovery, but of repair.
The wayfinding
Yeah, the wayfinding. They don't give you
that,
the answers, but they give you the roots.
and you don't have to go through them in order.
nonlinear, any way you want.
Can experience them however you are experiencing them, and they just help you, you know, touchstones on that journey. Uh, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I know we could go all day, but I wanna ask a little bit more rapid fire and thinking about what we've talked about, right? Rupture at the very beginning. So let's go back to the beginning, and your citizens here are listening are in the rupture phase. What do you really want them to know about that rupture phase?
I want them to know that they are not alone. What they're feeling is not unusual. It happens across different types of ruptures, even though the ruptures themselves are different. Because that's one of the things about rupture is that even though you may come in a different door than somebody else, you're still dealing with the same confusion. The rules have changed. You don't know what the new rules are. You're not even sure what language the new rules are written in. And I want people to know that they are not alone and that there need to be spaces for us. I mean, I've made one up, but how amazing would it be if there actually were other spaces? But that feeling that you're not alone and that this is not your fault. And and the pressure, I would also like to, on the just in the rupture phase, relieve some of the pressure people put on themselves to, well, the doctor said I should be better in 30 days. You know? I've been doing this supplement for 6 weeks. Why aren't I better? I want people to give themselves some grace. They've been through something. It's taken its toll. It changes everything.
What you're hitting on where I was kinda gonna go next, which was, what do you think some of the biggest lies are, right? In that rupture phase? Like, or to you, like, what was the lie?
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yes.
I mean, Goethe, not Kanye. Sorry, but that was what it could be worse is one you tend to hear, or at least you're still alive. At least you're still alive. Or, I just read a thing about a study, and it says that if you do this, you'll get better. Did you try it? And then people would come back like, did you try that product? Did you get that thing? And did it help? You're told a lot of things. They're well meant, but they don't land right. And I mean, you and I have talked about this, the difference between like intent and effect. I mean, if something's well intentioned, but it lands wrong, who cares about the intention? It landed wrong. And you're told a lot of lies about, well, if you do this treatment and this will help. And then when that doesn't help, it's like, okay, we'll do more of those treatments or try other things. And it puts you on a path, right? And a lot of people just chase treatment for a really, really long time, and more power to them. At a certain point, I said enough. I said, stop. Because the only way I'm going to learn to live with this and build a life with it is to stop denying that it's there and stop trying to fix something that I know after this point just isn't fixable anymore. Things will improve. And I know people who have had TBIs much longer who have said things do improve. And I've had, like I said, some improvements in the deficits through rehab, but what I live with every day doesn't improve. And a lot of people are there.
We are so hyper focused on the destination as the outcome. And what I hear in that is a pivot for you of the process is the point,
Yes.
right? The process is the point. And when I think about I'm thinking about belonging here, right? And I'm thinking about, like, yes, we want people to get to best guess to stand, but not because it's like it's the destination. It's to get to the experience. And so why do you think this belonging and this community is now the point? Like that's a I we've gotten there kind of together.
We have. We have.
You definitely believe the destination was the point. And how has that shift, occurred in you?
Nick describes the writing as the only therapy that's ever worked for me, which is true. And that's what it's really become. And the exploration that I've been able to do through the writing of understanding my own rupture, what I need, other people's ruptures, what they need, made me realize it isn't about the destination because we don't know where we're going to land, right? Will people who have gone through this be better in 3 years, better in 5 years? We don't know. But starting to take agency back is really important. And if you are driving the journey and you're exploring these ministries and you're exploring these different places, it's a way of getting your confidence back. Because one of the things that gets knocked right out of you when you go through rupture is your confidence. My confidence was based on my intellect. And all of a sudden, if that's not there, like, what am I so confident about anymore? But it wasn't until the world building, the exploration, the deeper understanding of what this could mean to more people and how alienated and isolated these people are, if we could just make them feel like there's common cause among us, it starts the process of accepting who you are. Because I said it before, like if you, and one of the things that my mother had said and I had written down, which is to stop comparing yourself to who you are. The question is, do you pretend it doesn't exist and try to create a life separate from it? That maybe that works for some people. For me, it was about accepting that this will always be part of my life and building a life with it. And that's the process. The process is building the life with it. It's not the destination.
Yeah, I'm buying it. I'm in. There's versions of me that did not buy that. uh, but I did. So we have talked about Best Guessistan. We have talked about this place. We have invited people to this place. What does that literally mean? How do we get to Best Guessistan? What does it look like? How do I
Well, there is a
become
map. My
okay?
genius stepdaughter is a creative director and designer, and she has done a beautiful, beautiful map. You can subscribe to my Substack. I publish at least once a week, sometimes more frequently, sometimes too frequently, because I have too many ideas that feel the need to get out. I have a little less impulse control than I used to also. The podcast will be launching. That's a way. The book will be published in March, which also turns out to be TBI Awareness Month because, of course, TBI has an awareness month. So there are lots of ways to come in. There's social media. We're building communities. There are conversations, and everyone's invited. Bring your rupture.
Bring it on. Well, we have covered a ton, and you're going to build this podcast in this world. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to make sure people know in this first episode?
I think just the only thing is I want to make sure you are accepting the position of Minister of Intelligent Timing. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, because there will be paperwork. It will be confusing and confounding, but no wrong answers in Best Guessistan.
I mean, as the Minister of Intelligent Timing, I cannot, not say that this Pluto in Aquarius, right? We've got the next 20 years of Pluto in Aquarius, which is all about dissolving systems. And it is right so obvious to me that Best Guessistan is rising up, and it is a new system in and of itself, but it really is more an examination of it. So how could I not step into the moment? The stars say it.
Thank you for accepting.
Thank you. Thank you for this time. I consider it a great honor for the many things that we have done in our life together, but I accept it as an incredible honor to be the curator of this story for you, right? It is your story, but it was, my opportunity to ask you the questions. And I know this is not the easiest conversation we've ever had. We've had harder
We
ones.
have. Yeah.
um, but I hope that everyone really gets to see what you've gone through, what you have become, and how wonderful this journey is for anyone, for us, for you, and for anyone that wants to hop on.
Thank you. And you were the only person, honestly, who I wanted to have on to interview me. It had to be you. And I love you forever. And
I
we did our Vulcan mind meld a long time ago. And that was our first love language. I would agree.
It was. All right. Well, thank you all for your time.
This has been the premiere episode of Best Guessistan, and it featured Kim Lauersdorf. Kim interviewed me about Rupture and about Best Guessistan and so much more. If this episode resonated with you, or you know someone who could benefit from it, please consider sharing it with them so they may find our community. And to support our work, you can like, subscribe, share, or join us at bestguessistan.com. Until next time, and remember, in Best Guessistan, there are no wrong answers.